Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Steve, and today I'm joined by Rebecca from Mimic for Hire, and actually you have a couple other aliases you go by as well across the internet. If you could be so kind of like introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about you.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Boom, mostly all over the internet, and I am Mimic for Hire on TikTok with a lot of puns, some Star Trek content, VTM content, a lot of dad jokes for D&D 5e, and anywhere and everywhere. I'd say 99% of the internet you will find me under Bomb Clancy because, like, going back to the puns, they're
Puns.
punstoppable.
It's
Puns.
they're inescapable. So yeah, like you're like all over my For You page all forever. So I figured I'd reach out and have you come on, but you also do some streaming and stuff as well.
Yeah, I definitely have guest starred on a bunch of Twitch streams. I primarily play Warlocks. However, I am open to playing other tabletop role-playing games. I got my start in Warhammer, and then in grad school, while going to school for my MSW, I was introduced to tabletop games in a therapeutic practice, and that's how I really got my start in it. And that was, in the before times, learning how to play in
Yeah.
person, and then with the Panini as it is, really learning how to use D&D Beyond and such, and that opened up my ability to play with other people that I wouldn't have otherwise. And so I was able to get into games like Star Trek Adventures or VTM or one shots with 8 orc bards for an orchestra, things of that sort. And so I've probably played in 10 plus one shots in the last 4 months. And more than one of them have turned into reoccurring campaigns where we play more than once in a month because we just really meshed well.
Yeah. It's an occupational hazard for sure. So do you use gaming in therapy then?
To some extent, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, because you said that's how you got exposed to it. I mean, you had done, you said Warhammer and some and
Mm-hmm.
other stuff, I guess tabletop gaming, but so RPGs as therapy?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. So there are actual games that have been developed and created either through Kickstarter or other channels where they usually have some background in the mental health world or academia, education, and they have the ability to meld the gaming component that kids can connect with and the social emotional needs that they may be interacting with or haven't interacted with, and they get the ability to play that out in a sandbox type environment. And that has been really therapeutic because I work in a school setting as well as private practice.
Have you seen the Twitch stream Clinical Role?
I do actually. I am quite familiar with those people, and I have spent time with those people, some of those people. Yeah, they're really amazing people, and I have my little Take This shield on my desk at home. And funny story, back in the day, E3, one of the coolest stories of volunteering with the Take This, which is adjacent to the Clinical Role people. They're really cool people. But they, a few years ago, before E3 was open to the public, they put out like this last minute APB saying, hey, if you can make it to E3, we just got approved for having a quiet room. Would anybody be able to make it? And I'm like, yes, I'm going to E3. And so I was able to go do that and attend E3 before it was opened up to the public because of what they do mental health wise in the game world.
Yeah, we've had Megan Connolly on a few times, Jack Birkenstock on as well, and I think I've talked to a few of the others. It's hard to keep track at this point. I've probably done like 600 of these, so everybody starts blending together after a while. And then when you add, like in the before times when you add meeting everybody in person as well, so many nerds out there. Uh, do you plan on hitting any cons in the near future?
Emerald City Comic Con is this weekend. And it's an interesting thing because that is primarily where I've met the large chunk of people that I know within the nerd world. I primarily follow the PAX circuit, but I love comics as well. I'm a DC person, and Dark Horse before DC, but
Yeah.
I would say that it's difficult. I don't know how much to say. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I definitely have reservations about different states and the way that they operate. And so while I feel secure with the people I know here in my state, because we have officially more or less remained in a super lockdown, my state's one of the one that is consistently pegged as the one that's the strictest in terms of guidelines of still staying like 6 feet apart or closing or not dining in. So for convention, going back to your convention thing, it's like, well, I really want to go to conventions, but I also work with children, and I have to be like responsible and ethical and knowing that my ability to expose myself to things is not necessarily going to negatively impact me if I get sick, but if I were to pass it on, I have a responsibility in knowing that if they were to bring it home, that it could be detrimental to their family when they only have, one person who provides for their family at their socioeconomical level, if you know what I mean. So in terms of cons, do I want to go? I want to go to all the cons. I'm going to Emerald City Comic Con this weekend. I'm going to be with my friends, but I'm also going to be going to panels to learn.
That's a totally reasonable response, and everyone needs to do what they think is best, best for them. We went to Gen Con, and like inside the convention itself, it was pretty good. Like, people were masked up and everything. I felt they could have spread things out more than they did. I was a little disappointed in that, because they had the room. They absolutely had the room, and they just looks like they made the conscious decision not to. So
yeah, I went to PAX West in Seattle, and that's considerably one of the larger conventions in North America each year. I don't think it's bigger than San Diego Comic Con, but it might be because it spreads blocks in buildings. And this year they cut down, and I work it every year. I work there, and so this year, I kind of hemmed and hawed with my really good friend who we've worked together. We did the same team, and we were backstage doing something on the Twitch side. And so this year that wasn't available. So we remained backstage because we figured, the fewer people we interact with, the better. And at least when you're backstage, you're with a crew. Like the crew who goes in is the crew who goes out. It doesn't change because there's no attendees backstage. But again, that convention was right before the beginning of the school year. So for me, I have to be mindful because in my state, they didn't approve or have it, well, I wouldn't say approve, but yeah, they didn't have the way they rolled out the vaccines and such. They didn't have it available for school age kids. And I am in a rural area where we have K through 12. So even though I'm not working with kids, for me, my decision was that I'm like, I can't expose myself to 40,000 people when I'm going into a school setting the next week with half of the school not vaccinated because it hasn't been available to them yet.
That makes sense.
Yep. And so for me, I was like, I feel comfortable going. And I think that, like you said, like they could have done more, but they did enough. And I feel very comfortable. If I was in a position where I was working just telehealth, I would have gone to Gen Con this year. I'm going to Gen Con next year.
Yeah.
Like I'm like a 5 con a year kind of person. I love conventions. I love sitting in on panels. In fact, this year I wanted to host at Phoenix Fan Fusion. And I had bought my tickets for January, and then they moved Phoenix Fan Fusion to Memorial Day weekend because of pandemic concerns.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to Arizona twice next year because I want to host panels there. But I mean, I'm also traveling out of the country twice next year as well. So I'm like,
You're in no matter
I'm
what.
concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I'm also traveling out of the country next year.
Ooh, where are you going?
Uh, I am going to England, to the UK,
Ooh. Ooh,
for D&D in the castle. Me and Ted will be one of the GMs. So I think next September.
that's
Um,
exciting.
yeah, I think that one is Lumley Castle is the castle. Don't ask me where it is. Have no idea. I've been there before. Still don't know. People
Do
ask
you
me
get to pick
like,
your players?
"What's that?"
Do you get to pick your players, or
No, no. It's actually the other way around, I guess. Like because it's like a high end vacation. Like I guess they're buying their DM. I don't know. We did it last year, and we had our own castle, and it was me, Doug, and Ted, and we ran 3 campaigns. There's 17 players,
Mm.
and so the way it works, it's like it's like 6 sessions spread out over 3 days, and there's like a day before where you kind of like everyone kind of meets everybody. So there are these mini campaigns that people sign up for. Super cool. It's a lot of
That's
fun.
cool.
But everyone will ask is like, well, what's the UK like? I'm like, I don't know. It was just in this castle the whole time. There's a really lot of time for sightseeing.
I mean, my dad and sisters live in London, so I'm all about going. I would be going there every other year, except
Yeah, the
the panini
apocalypse.
going on. Yeah,
Yeah,
the what I want to and am waiting to become an endemic has not happened yet.
yeah. Eventually, I mean, I feel like more than likely this thing is going to be the new cold down the road. But so what kind of content do you create over on TikTok?
So on TikTok, I have a lot of dad jokes and puns. I have so the way TikTok works, and I'm guessing a lot of your viewers already know this, but the way that you keep up and on is doing trends with sound bits. It may be a dance, it may be a movement, and then you apply whatever that trend is to your niche. So I create, I would say probably 90% D&D 5e content with a heavy influence on Warlock centric stuff. However, I've done a few things where like I pretend to be like I'll hold my cat. I'll put like a blanket over my ring light and I'll hold my cat and I act like I'm a druid in the bag of holding with the bagman,
Yeah.
like just interacting because I just think it's silly to like if you were in the bag of holding with the bag. I don't know, like things like this make me laugh. Um so there's an occasional thing like that. But just like silly little things that are just like I wouldn't say nuances, but like things that just make me laugh. Like on roll 20, you can roll like 500 d20s at once, and so there's a little bit of a delay, and then all of
Uh-huh.
a sudden, if you're looking at your character sheet, it's just like, and there's just like dice for days, and it's like you rolled 2,433, and like I love the fact that the community on TikTok, like when I posted that video, people are like, you rolled slightly above average. And I'm like, thanks. Because there's someone out there that knows, like, could do the conversion or the
Yeah,
math
yeah.
on 200 D20s and whatever that roll was, But, the other part of TikTok is responding to people within the community that you create. And so like some of these like little things that are funny to me, other people like will also think are funny. And so you can take that comment and make a new video off of it. So for example, if you're using D&D Beyond or a character sheet in general, you can put your religion on there or your faith. And so I don't know why or when I started it, but I have always and forever put George Michael as faith
Uh,
on my character sheets, which is like so stupid, but it's so funny to me.
and also dating yourself.
Yeah. And so I feel like without my age on there, I feel like I put enough clues out there
Yeah.
that people could put two and two together. But on like, for example, for that, like people thought it was silly because they got it. And so
Yeah.
then quite a few other people had put like, oh, that there's other musicians who have had song titles faith. And so I made another video where I like just looking at the video, looking at the character sheet, putting it on there. And so the one like I made last night was Limp Bizkit.
Yeah.
which was just like their version of that George Michael song.
I'm very familiar. I mean, I grew up in the late '80s, early '90s. Um, is is what I consider the height of human civilization for some things, for music anyway. For other things, it was really terrible. But what are you gonna do? So, where did the name Mimic for Hire come from?
So
Was Bon
it's
Clancy taken? Did someone already have that one over on TikTok?
no, I have that name on TikTok. So
Oh,
the thing is with TikTok, I have another account and I started it with some other people. I have exclusive therapy content, and the interesting thing is people don't like they have ideas on how to grow on TikTok, but realistically it's completely randomized and it changes. It consistently changes. So you and another person can start on the same day. Twins can start on the same day, look the same, post the same content, and one could get 100K views and the other could get 100. It is there is something that none of us know that we just cannot predict about it. And so that account, my therapy account, is over a year and a half old, and it has half or maybe a quarter of the followers that all of my friends have that started at the same time. And it's not a large amount, but I thought, I'm like, when I started my account, I didn't post therapy content on my account to begin with. So maybe my account is borked because TikTok kind of puts you like in lanes.
yeah.
And so I wasn't consistent in the therapy world or the therapy content. So I'm like, maybe my account is borked because now I'm a year into it and I've done nothing but therapy account and it's not getting views whatsoever, where I see my other friends getting thousands of followers by day.
I've heard like different theories. Like some is like the content you put out, some of it's like the content that you watched, from that account. I don't know. I went over to TikTok, made an account,
Mm.
and like we used to do like little stupid skits in the front of our videos. So I just like cut some of those off and threw them up. And I just like I don't know what to do over here. I just feel old. So but I like it. I like it as a consumer.
Yeah, they definitely have the psychology there to get people connected. So going for the mimic for hire. So anyways, a year and a half of this, I'm like floundering. I'm like at, I don't know, like 3K followers or something after a year and a half. And I'm like, I think my account's borked because there's other people who are like at 1 million that started after me and they're
Yeah.
putting out therapy content as well. I have a nice ring light. I'm consistent with posting 1 to 3 times a day. Like I'm doing all of the things that these guides are saying. I'm like, maybe it's at 6 months. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make a D&D account because I had occasionally posted some nerd stuff on my therapy and
Yeah.
it didn't get traction either. So I'm like, maybe I really do need a niche and maybe this account is Bork. So I have the therapy account. And so I created this one and I was talking to my friend. I'm like, what should my name be? I'm like, what's a stupid name? Like I'm like, I just want to see like if I give this account 30 days, what will happen?
So it was a
And
test.
it was a test account. I really made it because I'm like, well, I've already made some D&D content on my other account, but it's, one every 30 videos. I'm going to do this account and I'm going to do it every video. And within 1 month, I got almost the same amount of followers as I had on the other account in a year and a half. Posting in the same spot, I post in front of my art wall, following the same trends like I did on my therapy account. Like I physically applied the same formula. The only
Uh,
thing I did differently was I started the account and kept with one niche.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
So the mimic for hire was like, this is an account that's mimicking my other account, except that it is being used.
for
Like
D&D. Yeah.
yeah. And so, but it's also a super silly name, like hiring a mimic. I don't know, it's just a goofy concept.
I've got plenty of players that would definitely hire a mimic. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I had kicked around the idea of I really like the content creators who have their taverns.
Okay.
And yeah, and so I had thought about making the account. The account was almost named the Merry Mimic because I was going to go a more tavern route and bring some of the therapy in that way, and say like, you know, have my little setup and talk about it, like actually have like that grief part of it, like, oh, I noticed that you came back to the tavern, where's that other member, where'd they go, that must be sad, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And being more therapeutic and bringing it in that way. But the trend that I picked up that really picked up my account with the dad jokes just took off. So I'm like, well, I'm over here to like rap music. This is like a weird paradox between like the grief of losing a beloved NPC or character and then talking about like punny jokes. So I haven't done it yet. I might, maybe I will in the future. So that's how I got Mimic for Hire. It was a test account, and then it was more enjoyable apparently.
Do you think you'll go back to the therapy account, or maybe make a new therapy account and test that theory?
No, I'm gonna keep the therapy account. I'm only posting like once or twice a month. I'm not posting 1 to 3 times a day, but I definitely am keeping it. I have a lot of my con friends follow, like I have a lot of organic followers on that account. And so I have a lot of friends in real life who, so I do art therapy and expressive art therapy. And so what I do is I show people like, these are the things that you need. These are the tools, you know, get like a book or a piece of paper or a black piece of paper and a white piece of paper, you know, it's like very kind of like systematic and in a show and tell kind of way. Like, these are your supplies. This is what you do. This is what your end result is. And they're just 1-minute videos, quick minute art things that you could take to your therapist and say like, oh, I saw this. That my friends have told me. I've had multiple friends, you know, because like we said earlier, we're old, who have told me that they send my therapy TikTok videos to their kids who are on TikTok. And they're like, you should do this. So.
And how is it received? Is it received better because it's coming from a TikTok than a person?
Yeah, I think that, and I can't speak for parents, but I think that sometimes when you have teens, you're throwing whatever you can.
Yeah.
And if TikTok sticks, you'll go for it. Whether or not it does, it's kind of like checking a box. Like, well, I tried. If it's there, it's there. You're a teenager. You're going to do what you want. So at least you know it's a resource.
I've got one teenager. Well, for a little bit longer, she'll be a teen. And then the other one I mentioned before just turned 21, so almost done. I feel like I'm successful to have created a human and had them survive to 21. I feel like I did my job. I'm done with that one.
Yay!
Yeah, he's on his own.
That's good.
Yeah. See if we can get 2 for 2. If we can get the other one as well. We'll see. That one tends to be more trying.
Yeah, I recently heard one parent tell me, it was kind of funny. Well, it was kind of awkward. It was funny, but it was awkward. I had one parent who was telling me that they had 2 kids and they had a college fund for one and bail fund for the other. Yeah. Which I thought was comical.
Yeah.
And then
you met the kid, you're like, oh my God, no.
Well, I told it to another parent who was like talking about it, and they were so offended. And they're like, first of all, this behavior does not indicate that they will be going to jail, but also college isn't for everyone. I'm like,
both are true.
So. I'm like, but they were quite offended that I had said that. I was like, I was just saying, like,
yeah, some people just like to be offended anyway.
Parent, I'm like, I'm sorry your toddler's naked half the time. I don't know, like.
Yeah. That's funny. That, you know, one of the side effects of growing up in the 80s and 90s is you generally don't get offended that often.
Yeah. Empathy and kindness. Yeah. Try to be kind.
When it comes to RPGs, are you mostly a player or do you also GM?
I've done both. Yeah, I've done both. So I have, like I said, with the kids, I guide them through the different modules that we do. But I've done it. I was able to GM in person recently, and that was interesting because it was a one shot that I created that I was really excited about, and then it definitely was interesting because when you have a one shot, there's always the problem of going over and not finishing. And so some people love one shots like myself, and other people despise them because they want that character buildup, they want that camaraderie, they want that like connection.
Yeah.
And you lose some of that in a one shot by default because you're not fully going, you're not able to spend all of that time in the tavern week after week, or you know, help res a person if something goes south, you know. And so it was interesting doing it in person. I haven't done it online yet, but I would like to take that same one shot and do it online just because I love the lore and everything with
Now,
it.
is this for friends or for work?
For friends. This is just like people that I've met online and in person. And so that group in particular, they have 3 of the 6 who are GMs, but they all have like adult schedules. And so what we had kind of decided was, you know, each of us will have a module that we're kind of running simultaneously dependent on which GM's available. So no matter what you do in your session, you will take them out and return them to town. So if your problem is out in a mine, we know that, you know, GM1 has this like mining issue that the characters are going through, but they'll come back to town. And then the next time we come together, if it's GM2, well, this is my like ice capades, like mountain adventure, but we'll come back. And so that way we can have the ability to run campaigns without it just being one GM.
And it's more episodic.
And so we still get that cohesion. We still get the campaigning in, but it's not dependent on one GM or forcing one person to be a forever GM. Now, when I came in, I had said, you know, I'm new to all of you, also like new to GMing in person because I've been online. And it was a bit chaotic because of the parameters that I set in my one shot, which I knew like every GM who had like a lot of experience, they're like, you're doing a wild thing here. And then I did it. I was like, okay, I should have listened. It was a wild thing.
It's all right. You know what? Did they have fun?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think that it's one of those things where you just have to do it. You have to rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's only one way to learn.
Yeah, you have to get in there. And I think from communicating and knowing a lot of my friends in the nerd world, they, even as an experienced GM, question things because, you know, you're a player too, and so you want to make sure you're carrying it to some capacity. And there's a level, I would say, anxiety involved in that. Like
every time.
So I'm like, is there anxiety in being a GM for the first time for people where everyone at the table has GM'd? Yes. But would that change if it's the first time or the 50th time? Probably not.
No, I can tell you it sticks around. Now, when we ran for D&D in a castle, that was the most stressful, anxiety-inducing experience I've ever had. Because it's like that table is like 30 grand. Right, like it's about, between the stay and like the travel and everything, you're looking at about $5 grand a person. You're like, you know, at your home game, if you just have a bad game, it's just a bad, you know, it's a bad game. Whatever, you hang out with some friends, but you might like ruin someone's vacation. So
that's a lot of weight.
Yeah. And also, it's weird to think about like a high rollers table, but for D&D, it's so bizarre.
Yeah, that's, well, the most recent thing that I've learned about that I'm interested in seeing where people will go, and I think it would be a fun place to GM at, is in Wisconsin. Have you heard of the D&D home that is being?
They're doing a tavern or something there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, I have family in London, but I'm like, that's closer.
It is closer. Also, like, if you plan it, So Wisconsin, I've only been to Wisconsin once, but and it was for Gamehole Con, which was a really great convention. It's small if you haven't
Mhm.
been to it, and it's very like kind of intimate. The whole Wizards of the Coast team ends up being there, and you get to interact with a lot of people that are there. And then Gary Con is also in Wisconsin, so
I love the smaller cons. I mean, going back into dating ourselves,
yeah,
the back in the day they used to have games day for Games Workshop, and so going to that, I miss those small con feels like
yeah,
before things were like monetized by Repop and such. You know, when people just had like this city con where locals came in maybe from another state, and now it's almost like every con has international visitors, either through guests or attendees, which is cool, which is really amazing. I love that for the community. But if you love small feel of like Gary Con or Gen Con, how it was,
yeah,
um, Gen Con still some capacity has held on to what it was, or I don't know. You con more than once, correct?
yeah. I've been to Gen Con a few times. My first one was Gen Con 50, but I was never really much of a con goer until after we started doing Nerdarchy. Um, like we always kind of like existed in our own little like bubble.
Yeah, I definitely I love con. I mean, I was born and raised on video games, and so I'm a Penny Arcade convention person, but I really would love to hit up Dragon Con. I'm also huge into comics. So for me going to I really don't want to go to San Diego Comic Con. It's huge, but I would
Yeah,
love to go to like Toronto Comic Con and New York City Comic Con. But Dragon Con also on the list. I've done Phoenix Fan Fusion more than once back when it was a Comic Con, and now that it's Fan Fusion. Um, I've done like Jet City Comic Con. I've done a lot of the smaller cons that are like the Detroit's Comic Convention, you know, things like that.
do you tend to hit
That
more
is all
like
fun.
comic cons than and pop cons than gaming cons?
Um, that's hard to say.
What's your
I would
five
say
five cons a year? What's your lineup usually look like?
I if I had 5 cons in a year, I definitely hit up Emerald City Comic Con. That's my number one, and then PAX West by default because it is in Seattle.
Yeah,
Um, and then after that, I would probably say Rose City Comic Con, Phoenix Fan Fusion, and PAX South is no longer, but I loved PAX South. PAX East is the BCEC is BCEC, I think that's what it is. The Boston Convention Center is amazing. Hands down, it is like the best layout in my opinion for a convention center. It looks like a Star Trek spaceship, but the way that they have like the fishbowl with the walkways over is just such a chef's kiss, just an amazing layout. However, the infrastructure around it is kind of trash.
yeah.
San
You gotta come
Antonio.
out to Unplugged.
I have so many. So, okay, so I am supposed to go to Unplugged. The people that I know through PAX, what they do, they're all okay. So, PAX Unplugged is in Philadelphia, correct?
Yes.
And I know are from up and what they do is they get on a train. They've been doing it every year since PAX Unplugged started. They get on a train and play board games all the way down from Boston, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so like this has been like on the agenda, but you know, again with the school being you Christmas break, spring break, and summer break. So I'm kind of at the whim of that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
this year's
I
tough.
unplugged because unplugged is happening soon, right?
2 weeks.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
right before the holidays this year, and that's going to be another interesting thing going forward when we talk about unplugged. So convention centers book convention slots out years in advance. And so the majority of conventions will always be on the same weekend, years out, with the exception of leap years, which generally jack it up, or existing conventions that only book every other year or every 4 years or such. So you might have a convention like Emerald City Comic Con is usually between a couple weekends, and then there's a couple other conventions that shift a week early or later depending on the year based on another convention already having that weekend booked. So trying to plan for it is going to be really difficult going forward because all of these conventions this year have been shifted to months they've never been in the past.
Yeah.
So it'll be really interesting going forward to see if PAX Unplugged now remains like the week before Christmas, which isn't the worst thing in my opinion, but also if I'm going to visit that area, I don't want to go in December.
Yeah, I mean they do have holiday stuff going on, so that might be kind of cool. But also, yeah, I get that. But PAX has always been like the end of November, beginning of December for Unplugged. Like for us, it's almost like our local con because it's in Philadelphia, like you said, and we live in South Jersey, so we're like, I don't know, we film like 15 minutes from the bridge, so it's pretty close. The first year was terrible because I went over the Thursday before it started to meet up with some friends, and it was awesome. Drove right in, parked right next to the convention center. Perfect. Next day, I did not realize was the Broad Street Run. And so I drove in again, and like I just started driving in circles further and further away from the convention center until I ended up parking where like the high speed line would have dropped me off anyway. So I ended up calling the other guys and being like, you might as well just take the speed line over because that's where you're going to end up. But yeah, so I don't think it's been the same weekend since. So I think like they've been playing with the weekends just based off of availability and being a new con. Maybe, and with the with everything that's happened, who knows what that's going to look like next year or the year after that, like you said.
Yeah, more to come. I'll go I know. So yeah, the Emerald City Comic Con is a go-to con for sure. Jet City Comic Con is really fun. It's a really cute comic convention we have locally. Rose City Comic Con, really nice. Phoenix Fan Fusion has a really nice blend of people who are well known. It'll be interesting to see how that con shakes out because it is going to be during Memorial Day weekend next year. So it's normally in January, and so it'll be.
Oh, that's a huge difference.
Yeah. We're going to be in the hundreds for sure.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hot. It's going to be hot, and it'll be interesting. What are your top 5 cons?
So I want to hit Gary Con. I've never been to that one. Gamehole Con I've only been to once, so I would like to get back to that. Origins is a really good show. I do like Gen Con. Unplugged is our local. So that's all. So that I think that's a 5. Like I prefer like kind of like strictly RPG cons. Because the other ones, I don't feel like there's enough stuff for me to do there or that I'm that interested in doing. So.
Yeah, I sit in panels. Emerald City Comic Con, I really love it because I can hit up the DC part, and they have a pretty good presence for authors, and so I write prolifically, like I'm constantly writing stuff, and so they have a lot of panels from industry professionals, and I've got a lot of really great advice and information and guidance for branding. They've had like panels from lawyers when it comes to like negotiating or collaborating with other professionals, and like I've just got a ton of really good information from going. I'm like, I pay $50 and then I get like 8 hours of information on this like side thing, and I'm like, that's priceless. Whereas PAX, it's just fun. I mean, I grew up with video games, that's like, if you watch my videos, I have I love art too, doing expressive art therapy. I have like, I hoard art. I have like 20 plus pieces of art in my home office. And then my office in the at our agency, our building, our company, I've also got like 20 plus pieces of art in that one. And from where I'm sitting right now, I've got 7 pieces of art in this room that is like 80 square feet. And this is not my lobby where I have, I know, 8 pieces of art out there and another one hanging above the door. Like I have a thing for art. So when I go to,
Do you
do
you have a favorite artist?
all of them. No.
Oh.
I I've always been an art nerd. Like when I was 8, I got into Impressionism, and I thought Impressionism was like the coolest shit. So I had a Monet like themed room. Like reasons I was bullied as a child. I was trying to talk to children about Monet and like
Yeah.
Van Gogh and shit on the
What?
playground.
That wasn't cool? They weren't feeling that?
No, they weren't. And then,
I can't believe
going
it.
into high school, I'm like learning about like pop art. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. This guy made art out of soup cans. So I like hung like cereal boxes on my wall in between like Britney Spears posters. So I'm like, okay, he has this Marilyn Monroe thing, and then he has this thing. I'm like, I'm gonna combine it. So like that also did not make friends in high school, but
I can't believe it. Like
I don't know.
my
I've
brother
always had a thing for art.
my brother went to UA in Philadelphia, and he started doing I guess it's 3-dimensional illustrations. So like he like makes dolls and would like sew doll bodies and then like photographs them is kind of what he did. So I'm he didn't get picked on by his brothers at all for playing with dolls.
Never.
Not at all.
No.
So,
No, good thing it was a 80s or 90s thing, so there wasn't the internet to also.
yeah, that's true too. You know what? I feel so bad for kids growing up nowadays. It's like all the dumb stuff we used to do. Imagining that being recorded for all time. I don't know if maybe we would have done less dumb stuff, but definitely what we did do did not need to be recorded.
No, I would have recorded it. I would have. I cringe back on the thought of the fact that I had access to a public computer in a public library, and I was RPing what I was RPing just in a free room with other people who could have walked by.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm like,
I grew up just pre-internet. I would say probably like my teens, people were starting to have internet dial-up. But even then it was like, yeah, even then like a family might have a computer. Not like today. Like I didn't own a computer until after I bought my first house. And
I did not either.
And it was a gateway. Do you remember those?
Yes.
I
remember
boxes.
Sun and like just giant, massive pieces of machinery.
Yeah.
It's like the original self home security system. Just pick it and toss it and you will do damage.
Yeah.
If you can lift it.
It's just a room.
No, I remember our computer lab, because I hung out, I know, shocker, in the computer room during lunchtime or the library. And so we had one computer that had the modem, had like the Skillerex sound going. And it was like that one computer could go on the internet.
Back in the day when you had to murder a robot to get onto the internet. The good old days.
Yeah. Log on to see, set your status on AOL and Pink and get off before you get kicked off when someone uses the phone.
That's funny. Yeah. So you mentioned being a big comic nerd, and I pretty much I'm so happy that we're getting like all these movies and shows now, because I guess I read comics up until like my early 20s, and then it just got so expensive. I was like, I should probably get a drug habit or something so I could save some money at that point, because my pull list was so much. So I just went cold turkey, and then I would just like pick up graphic novels from time to time, but then it got to a certain point where I'd pick up a graphic novel and I'd read and be like, I have no idea what's going on, just because I hadn't been reading for so long.
Yeah. See, the burden and blessing of having ADHD is that you also don't know what's going on, but you might not care. And you're
Oh,
like, it's fine. I might forget these details, or maybe I already knew them and I'm just going to fill in the blanks and be okay. And just reading it like face value and not having a problem with it. That's where I am on that. And I'm just like, but I've also been really consistent. BPRD is my #1 comic, which is through Dark Horse. But I'm not a Marvel person. I don't think I've watched more. I think I watched the Iron Man movies, a couple of them, and then I may or may not have talked to someone who was in crisis over the final one, who told me everything that happened with the storylines and how upset they were. And they're like telling me about a death that was very traumatic. And I'm like, that might be the only movie that I have watched. So I guess spoiler alert, but you know, it's whatever. So I just not a Marvel person, but graphic novels, I do love the graphic novels. I like the grittier stuff. Last year I watched Utopia on Amazon Prime. Have you watched that?
wait a minute. That sounds familiar. Did it have like really weird like cinematography to it?
I don't know to what capacity you're talking about, but what I can say is that it was a remake of a show that was done back, I think, in the 90s, and everyone freaking loved the one that was back in, I want to say the 90s or early 2000s. It was done a long time ago, and people loved it, and it was well received. And this one that was recreated, just, I think it was poor planning on the timing of it, because it was released like at the end of 2019, and it is centered on a comic that was predicting the future of a virus. And the first episode of the season is the second and finalized or conclusion of what happens in this utopia pandemic thing.
Yeah, I did not see it then. I know I don't see it. And I remember seeing the trailer for it though.
Well, it tanked. People hated it. And I don't know if it was just because it is, and like DC, I would say, is normally or generally has had, or like, I wouldn't say address darker topics, but they, I don't know. I don't want fans to at me for what my opinion. So I'll just say that Utopia was dark. It was dark. It was dark of the dark, and it's comical, like to the point that it's comical. And if you don't, I wouldn't say if you don't understand it, you would look at the other person laughing at it. Like, why are you laughing? You're like, because it's supposed to be funny. Like, it's satirical. It's like funny. But I think that because it was predicting the first part of the comic in this show was about a pandemic, and it happened at the end of 2019, it was still rolling at the beginning of 2020 when we had our pandemic. So I don't know if that was the real reason, or maybe it's just crappy and I have bad taste, but I thought it was hilarious. Like, the longer it went on, I'm like, this is funny. But the downside is that they aren't continuing it for a second season. So you just kind of get left off where you're left off. And it's like, well, all right, someone connected to Sundance make this a movie or something. I need more.
That's the worst, when you like something and it's just not coming back. It makes me kind of like leery of like wanting to watch certain things too. It's like, especially like, I guess the last thing I watched was Dune, the new Dune, and I was like, oh man, how much money does this thing have to make for us to get the rest of it? Just like.
That is a really good, because we watched Dune. We just watched it on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I think they did a really good job. Am I allowed to talk about it without it being a spoiler? Spoilers.
Spoiler alerts. There we go.
Spoiler alerts. I will say the first and most upsetting part of that movie was watching the palm trees burn.
Oh.
I was like, no. I was like full Fern Gully. I was like, no, not the palm trees. He's been watering those bitches for years.
Yeah.
Like, no.
That was kind of sucked.
It
Your
was just a blip.
your inner
So
druid.
yeah, yeah. Which is funny. I almost became a druid player instead of a warlock player
Well,
by
you know
mistake.
you can go back and forth.
No, I'm on the way of the
Once you go
warlock.
warlock, you never go back.
Yeah, no, I'm locked in on warlock. So no, Dune was good. I would say, kind of talking about like nerd stuff. Movies are like my heart and soul, and I rarely meet people who've watched more movies than I have. I do, and so we have really good conversations when we talk about them. But I spent my childhood and a lot of my adult years, most of my teen years, I skip movies, I stole whatever. But my friends and I, we would go online, or we would call the movie phone line because you had to call for the movie times back in the
Yeah, yeah.
day. And so we
Or
would
look
write
at the
down,
newspaper, one or the other.
yeah. And so we would write it down and we'd make a schedule, and we would lose like maybe the first 15 or the last 15 minutes, but we would stay there from like 10 a.m. till 10 p.m. at night watching 4 or 5 movies.
You
And
were
we would
one
just
of
be popcorn all
those,
day.
just stealing
Yeah.
movie after movie.
Yeah. Yeah. But we did it for like 4 years straight. Like it was like a 5 movie theater. They couldn't
Yeah,
not know we were there, or
yeah,
they just weren't paid enough to care. Could be both. But,
yeah. I mean,
we
making
were,
minimum wage in a movie theater, like that's a lot of hassle to chase these kids out.
yeah. And we weren't like, I wouldn't say we were like, that was the extent of our bad kidness. Like we weren't like, we were sitting there. We bought our popcorn once. We got our free refills, and we didn't like, we weren't like punching each other, like
Yeah,
blocking the view or running around. Like we were just sitting there as two people watching a movie, and we weren't watching like, The Cell, or some other
yeah.
movie that we should not have been watching. Um, so really movies, talking about movies. I don't know why I'm on this tangent. I love movies. I just all the movies all the time. So watching Dune, um, yeah, Dune was fun, and having a good conversation about that movie. If you think of all of the books and the content and descriptions that we were given in the books, if Star Trek can have all of the seasons it had, or Star Wars can have all of the movies it had,
Yeah.
Dune can have more than 2 movies
Yeah, yeah.
easily.
I mean, the first one was like 4 hours long, right? The very first one they did, and that was like,
Well, and this one was 2.5, and I think it was really
yeah,
clever. So I did because after the movie, I read a little bit more on it, and the director only agreed to signing up for it if he could get 2 movies, and so the people, I can't think of the name for it, told him point blank, they're like, if it doesn't do well, we're not giving you a second movie. We're in it for money.
yeah,
And he said, well, Dune can't be one movie. I can't do this if it's one movie. I can't do it justice. And they're like, well, make it work, knowing that you might not get a second movie. So he made that movie knowing that he needed to put enough in there to connect us to the books or prior movies,
yeah.
knowing that we might not get a second one. So I think that it was really clever on his end and how he did that, because for people who know about Dune, there's so much more. But if we only get one more movie, he put enough in that first one to wrap it up in a second movie if we only get one more movie. But like Star Wars, you can have the movies told from different perspectives, and Dune fans will be happy if you continue on the trajectory that they are with
Well, I
what
mean,
they
forget
did.
Star Wars. Like, look what Marvel did. Like, they did like 20 movies, and also by like parsing it out, it was actually it made them more successful, and not trying to just cram everything. Like all the superhero movies prior to the Marvel Cinematic, the my biggest complaint has always been them trying to cram too many plot lines into one movie, and it just makes it terrible. Especially like comics have like, I mean, they're already storyboarded, and they already
Mm-hmm.
have like, they already know which ones have done well in the past. Like, you don't have to really reinvent the wheel there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just my opinion anyway.
No, it's valid. And it's also difficult too because comics. The interesting thing for consumers is that every person consumes the media in their own way. So when you
Yeah,
get that visual representation in movie form, you have your own ideas of what the story is versus what they have included. And so, it's like when people say the movie's never as good as the book. Well, it's because our brain will fill in the blank, but so will theirs.
Yeah.
And so they have to conceptualize what they see, and it's not going to be the same as us because we're going to make it make sense from our perspective. And so 7.8 billion people in the world, everyone's going to have a different view on what should or could be included. And I could talk an hour on that. Like,
Yeah.
one of my favorite things.
I think we're in agreement with that. But I guess to my point is like, right, it's just when you try and do all of those things in one movie instead of picking one and being like, all right, we're going to lean into this hard. Like the Spider-Man movies were terrible for that, where it's like, okay, you've got 3 major storylines in this one movie. Why did you think that was going to be a good movie?
Do you think that's why? So DC has always like languished behind Marvel in terms of their movies, like historically. And do you think that that's why? Because they don't cram. They have such independent films. Do you think that is?
Well, I don't know, because like once they moved into the cinematic universe, they stopped cramming things. Right? There's foreshadowing, and they just leave open threads and open loops that they plan to go back to. I feel like with DC, I think they've done the same thing where they have crammed, or they just don't stay true to the source material, and someone I just feel like someone comes in, they're like, we're going to put our artistic spin on this, and like, most of the people that are going to see those movies, they don't really care. They want to see what Frank Miller did or whoever, that's what they really want to see, because that's what kind of like drew them in. And also, but like in the same thing, like you have stories that have already, been proven. So in my opinion, just rerun that, but in movie format, and you'll probably be successful. Like the Aquaman franchise and the Wonder Woman franchises by far have been the best in my opinion for DC. And they didn't try and do a lot. Like I feel like you get more bang for your buck when you don't try and do a lot, and you just focus on like one part of the character or one specific storyline, instead of like, how can we take these 5 most popular Wonder Woman stories and make them one movie?
Interesting content. When you bring up Wonder Woman, I sat in on a panel with some really well-known people from DC, I want to say. Was it Marvel? I don't recall, but it was, they were talking about the adaptation of comics to movies, and they got on the subject of Wonder Woman, and there is a disproportionate amount of movies that are led by male superheroes. However, there are a significant amount of female or woman or femme characters, depending on, how they are in their species, whether they're human or not. And so, they went into this huge discussion on who has enough lore or backstory to create a standalone film. And this was before Wonder Woman was released, and Wonder Woman did well. But who else in DC, Marvel, or otherwise has enough backstory that would get people interested? And one of the biggest talks in that panel was Lois Lane.
Oh, that's interesting.
And making an yeah. And so they weren't just talking about like characters who were the superheroes. They were talking about people who, connected to. So, and so they had brought up like Pepper Potts. People know who Pepper Potts is, yet she's in every movie. She's not the star. Does she have enough? And so they kind of had this really good back and forth banter about, who could have a standalone movie, because Wonder Woman did, and she did well. Yeah, so they didn't say that Lois Lane was getting her own movie, but they definitely said that, we all know like Pixar, they've got their game plan years out. Yeah. So do these production companies. And so if Wonder Woman's the tip of the iceberg, there's more coming. There's definitely more coming from both DC and Marvel. And I don't know what they are, but
Time will
from a
tell.
comic perspective, it's super cool to know that they're in the pipeline.
Well, I really like it because it's how I get my fix of comic books nowadays. With all the shows that have been coming out and all the movies, because I just don't have the time to read them the way I used to, or like for the same reason I don't play video games is like I will get absorbed into that world way too much. I have a compulsive personality, so it's like I'm kind of like no matter what I do in my life, I'm generally like all or nothing. So it's best if I stay away from comic books.
Yeah,
So
I go back to movies. I go.
because I'll
That's
be
probably
back
the
to a
same reason.
30, a 30, title pull list.
Yeah, that's
And,
probably why I stay away from anime, because I can
yeah.
do a movie in 2.5 hours and it's done. Or comics, I'm like, you know what, BPRD. It is. It's, if you're not familiar, it's Hellboy and Ape Sapien in them. So
That's some good stuff. We did we had David Harbour on the show. I got to do an interview with him.
it's pretty cool.
Speaking of Hellboy, because like we found out that he plays D&D, and I tweeted at him, and I was like, "Hey, do you want to jump on the live chat and talk about D&D?" And I couldn't believe he said yes. So that is one of the the highlights of doing Nerdarchy.
Ooh, it's all nerd stuff. So,
Yeah.
question for you for RPG stuff, are there other, or it doesn't seem from what I understand or what I have seen that there's been successful comic adaptations of RPGs that people are super familiar with. I know that there's like little pockets here and there of people who do things, but it doesn't seem like there's been like consistent movies or shows or something from D&D or
No.
but like VTM has been around for 20 plus years, and that's a huge RPG game. Like a lot of people love vampires, like that's a huge game, and so what is your opinion on that with comics or media being adapted from these role-playing games that have been like undercurrent of the nerd world?
So I guess they've tried it a bunch, and there are comics, but I guess it's because RPGs are more about the experience, right? Like and like we've talked about what does a good D&D movie look like. Well, who depending you ask, they'll tell you different things. Oh, it's adapting one of R.A. Salvatore's books into a movie. But I'm like, but that's just a fantasy movie. Is it really? What makes it a D&D movie? Right. So like there was, I don't know if you ever watched The Gamers, by the Dead Gentleman Productions. I think I could be wrong. But it was kind of more, but it was kind of like comedic, and part of it is at the table and part of it is in the game world. And there's another one called Of Dice and Men. You can watch it on Amazon Prime, which is pretty good.
Of Dice and Men, I believe, did a panel at Emerald City Comic Con that I got to sit in on.
Oh, Seth Polanski, Kelly Slagle, they're the ones I'm involved with. There's the book series of Dice and Men, and then there's a movie of Dice and Men.
Okay.
The movie is kind of about a group that plays RPGs, and most of it is like outside of the game, and then part of it is inside of the game, but like it just has to do with like kind of like the personal relationships between the group members mostly. But it was done really well. And like I think I think that's what a D&D movie should be like. Like it should be about the experience of gaming, not necessarily about the lore involved with D&D, because at a certain point it just becomes another fantasy movie in my opinion. But I've seen many different takes on this, and none of us agree. So
I just like hearing it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's good.
We're just past the hour mark, and I know you carved out some time for us today, so I don't want to be greedy with it. Any final thoughts before we head on out?
No, thank you so much for having a fun conversation that kind of zigged and zagged through the nerd world.
Yeah, we're kind of like chaotic here and random.
some convention stuff and what have you.
Well, thanks for coming on. As always, folks, down in the description, you can find links to check Rebecca out throughout the interwebs. Go stalk her in the good way, not the creepy way. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Are you good?